The alarm screamed through the corridors of the U's Valiant like a dying animal. Captain Jake Morrison rushed from his quarters toward the bridge, his boots echoing against the metal floors as red emergency lights bathed everything in blood-colored shadows. He had been dreaming of his childhood farm on Europa when the sound jolted him awake, and now his heart hammered against his ribs as he tried to shake off the last traces of sleep. Lieutenant Amy Carter stood at the communications console, her face pale as moonlight as she worked frantically at her controls. Her fingers moved across the holographic display with desperate speed, and Jake could see the tremor in her hands even from across the bridge. The main view screen flickered between 3 different signals, each one showing scenes that made his stomach turn cold. "Report?" Jake said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. The bridge crew turned toward him with relief written across their faces, as if his presence alone could somehow fix whatever nightmare they were witnessing. Amy looked up at him with eyes that seemed older than they had been just hours before. "Sir, we're receiving distress signals from 3 colonies on the Outer Rim. New Kansas, Haven Point, and Terra Verde. They're all under attack." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she had to clear her throat before continuing. "The signals are weak and breaking up, but what we're getting is bad." Jake moved to stand beside her, watching as the view screen cycled through fragmentary transmissions from the 3 worlds. The first showed buildings on fire, their metal frames twisted like broken bones against a smoke-filled sky. The second displayed what looked like a crater where a city should have been, with nothing left but scorched earth and scattered debris. The third signal cut out completely, leaving only static that hissed like an angry snake. "How many people?" Jake asked, though part of him didn't want to know the answer. Amy's hands shook as she consulted her readings. New Kansas had a population of 18,000. Haven Point was home to 22,000 colonists. Terra Verde had the most people, about 15,000 in the main settlement and scattered farms. She paused, swallowing hard. "Sir, based on these signals, I don't think many of them made it out." The bridge fell silent except for the quiet hum of the ship's systems and the distant wail of alarms that continued to sound throughout the vessel. Jake stared at the view screen, trying to process numbers that felt too large and too terrible. To be real, over 50,000 people, gone in what appeared to be a matter of hours. "Who did this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lieutenant Tom Bradley looked up from his sensor station, his young face grim. "The energy signatures?" "Match Zephrian weapons, sir. Plasma bombardment systems, the kind they use on their heavy cruisers." He hesitated, then added, "The attack patterns suggest they weren't trying to capture the colonies. This was pure destruction." Jake felt something cold settle in his chest. The Zephrian Empire had been growing more aggressive over the past few years, expanding their territory and making threatening statements about human expansion into their space. But actual attacks on civilian colonies crossed a line that no one had expected them to cross. "Any word from Terran Command?" Jake asked Amy. She nodded, her fingers dancing across her controls again. "Admiral Peter Kane has called an emergency session on Earth. All available ships are being ordered to return to Sol System immediately." She looked up at him with worry clear in her eyes. "Sir, if the Zephrians are willing to attack civilian colonies, what's to stop them from moving on the core worlds?" Jake didn't answer immediately because he was asking himself the same question. The Zephrian Empire commanded over 200 capital ships, each one larger and more heavily armed than anything in the human fleet. Their technology was more advanced, their weapons more powerful, and their military doctrine seemed to prioritize overwhelming force over any kind of restraint or mercy. "Set course for Earth," he ordered. "Maximum speed." As the Valiant turned toward home, Jake remained on the bridge, staring at the view screen that now showed the starfield ahead of them. Behind them, 3 human worlds burned, and ahead of them lay uncertainty and fear. He thought about the families on those colonies, people who had left Earth to build new lives on distant worlds, only to die under alien fire. The hours that followed felt like years. Reports trickled in from other ships, painting a picture of devastation that grew worse with each transmission. Rescue vessels that reached the attack sites found very little left to rescue. The Zephrians had been thorough in their destruction, using weapons designed to eliminate not just buildings but entire ecosystems. When the Valiant finally reached Earth orbit, Jake could see dozens of other ships converging on the same point. The entire Terran defense fleet seemed to be gathering, their hulls gleaming in the light of humanity's homestar. It should have been an impressive sight, but Jake knew the truth that they were all trying not to think about. 40 ships, even working together, would not be enough to stand against 200. Zephrian vessels. The emergency session convened aboard the orbital station Liberty Prime, a massive structure that served as headquarters for the Terran defense fleet. Jake joined captains and admirals from across human space in a conference room that felt too small for the weight of the decisions they would have to make. Admiral Peter Kane stood at the head of the table, his weathered face showing every one of his 60 years. He had served in the fleet longer than anyone else in the room, and his reputation for calm leadership had seen humanity through several smaller conflicts with alien species. But Jake could see the strain in the older man's eyes as he began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen, we face the greatest threat in human history," Admiral Kane began, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "The Zephrian Empire has declared war on humanity by attacking our civilian populations. Intelligence suggests this is only the beginning." Intelligence Officer Lisa Brooks stood up, activating a holographic display that showed the current positions of known Zephrian fleets. "Our sources indicate that the Empire views human expansion as a threat to their dominance in this region of the galaxy," she said. "They believe that by eliminating our outer colonies and demonstrating their superior firepower, they can force humanity to withdraw to our core systems and accept tributary status." Jake felt his hands clench into fists under the table. The idea of humanity bowing to alien overlords made his blood boil, but the alternative seemed to be extinction. "What are our options?" asked Captain Susan Torres from the defense station Liberty Prime. Admiral Kane's expression grew even more grim. "Conventional warfare appears hopeless. They outnumber us 5-1 and possess superior technology. Our weapons are effective against their ships, but in a direct confrontation we would be overwhelmed." The room fell into a heavy silence as everyone absorbed the implications of those words. Jake looked around the table at the faces of his fellow officers, seeing his own fear and determination reflected in their eyes. That was when Dr. Ryan Phillips from the Xenobiology Department entered the room. Dr. Ryan Phillips moved into the conference room with the quick steps of a man carrying urgent news. His lab coat was wrinkled and stained with coffee, and his gray hair stuck up in wild directions as if he had been running his hands through it. Jake Morrison watched the scientist approach Admiral Kane with what looked like a datapad clutched against his chest like a shield. "Admiral, I need to speak with you immediately," Dr. Phillips said, his voice breathless with excitement and fear. "It's about Project Dragonfire." The room fell completely silent. Jake had never heard of Project Dragonfire, and from the confused looks on the faces around the table, neither had most of the other officers. Admiral Kane's expression changed from grim determination to something Jake couldn't quite read. "Dr. Phillips, this is not the time for classified research projects," Admiral Kane said carefully. "We're dealing with an immediate threat to human survival." "That's exactly why this is the time," Dr. Phillips replied, setting his datapad on the table with shaking hands. "Admiral, Project Dragonfire has been preparing for exactly this kind of situation for 15 years. We have allies that could help us, allies that the Zephrians have never encountered and would never expect." Jake leaned forward in his chair, feeling the tension in the room shift from despair to cautious hope. Around the table, other officers were doing the same, their attention focused completely on the nervous scientist. Admiral Kane was quiet for a long moment, his weathered hands folded in front of him. Finally, he spoke. "Dr. Phillips, everyone in this room has clearance for classified information regarding threats to human security. Tell us about Project Dragonfire." Dr. Phillips took a deep breath and activated his datapad. The holographic display in the center of the table changed from star charts to images that made Jake's breath catch in his throat. Massive creatures, soared through space between distant stars, their bodies covered in scales that reflected starlight like mirrors. They had wings that stretched for kilometers, long necks that ended in heads filled with teeth, and eyes that seemed to burn with intelligence. 15 years ago, a deep space exploration vessel called the UES Discovery found something impossible in the Kepler sector. Dr. Phillips began, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. They discovered a civilization of beings that humanity would immediately recognize as dragons. Captain Susan Torres from the defense station spoke up. Dragons? You mean like the creatures from Earth mythology? Dr. Phillips nodded eagerly. Exactly like Earth mythology, except these beings are real and they're more advanced than any species we've encountered. They call themselves the Drakmari, and they've been traveling between stars for millions of years. Jake stared at the images, floating above the table. The creatures looked exactly like the dragons from old Earth stories, complete with scales, wings, and what appeared to be the ability to breathe fire. But these dragons moved through the vacuum of space as easily as fish swimming through water. How is that possible? Asked Intelligence Officer Lisa Brooks. No biological creature should be able to survive in space, let alone travel faster than light. That's what makes them so remarkable, Dr. Phillips replied, his excitement growing. The Drakmari have evolved beyond the normal limits of biology. Their scales contain microscopic fusion reactors that provide them with unlimited energy. They can manipulate gravity fields around their bodies to achieve faster-than-light travel. And their plasma breath isn't just fire. It's controlled nuclear fusion that they can direct with incredible precision. Admiral Kane leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. Dr. Phillips, you said these Drakmari could be allies. What makes you think they would help humanity against the Zephrian Empire? Dr. Phillips gestured toward his datapad, and new images appeared. These showed humans in environmental suits standing next to the massive dragons, looking tiny in comparison but somehow not afraid. Jake could see that the humans and dragons appeared to be communicating, though he couldn't imagine how such different species could understand each other. Commander Helen Wade has been our primary liaison with the Drakmari for over 10 years, Dr. Phillips explained. She's established relationships with several of their elders and learned about their culture and history. The Drakmari are not primitive creatures, Admiral. They're an ancient civilization that has seen countless younger species rise and fall. Jake found his voice. Where is Commander Wade now? She's been living part-time on the Drakmari homeworld of Paraxis, learning their ways and serving as humanity's ambassador, Dr. Phillips answered. She should be here within the hour. I sent word as soon as the colony attacks were reported. The conference room door opened, and a woman in her 40s entered with the confident stride of someone used to dealing with the impossible. Commander. Helen Wade had short brown hair streaked with silver and eyes that seemed to hold secrets. She wore a standard fleet uniform, but Jake noticed that it had been modified with additional equipment he didn't recognize. Admiral Kane, Dr. Phillips, she said, nodding to each in turn before taking a seat at the table. I came as soon as I received the emergency signal. I assume this is about the Zephrian attacks. Commander Wade, please tell these officers about your experiences with the Drakmari, Admiral Kane said. Helen looked around the table, meeting each officer's eyes in turn. The Drakmari are the most ancient and powerful species in this region of the galaxy, she began. They've been alive for millions of years, and many individuals have lived for thousands of centuries. They've watched civilizations rise and fall, and they've learned to recognize which species are worth saving and which are destined to destroy themselves. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. What do they think of humanity? Helen smiled for the first time since entering the room. They're impressed with us. Unlike most species they've encountered, humans showed respect for existing life when we colonized new worlds. We've made efforts to preserve native ecosystems and integrate peacefully with other alien species. Most importantly, we've demonstrated genuine curiosity about other cultures rather than just trying to conquer them. But would they actually fight for us? Captain Torres asked. Helen's expression grew serious. The Drakomari have a particular hatred for species that practice genocide. They've witnessed the destruction of dozens of peaceful civilizations over the millennia, and they consider it the greatest evil in the universe. She paused, looking directly at Admiral Kane. Elder Korath, one of their most respected leaders, specifically told me that dragons would consider humans worthy allies if we ever faced extinction from a superior force. Jake felt his heart begin to beat faster. The idea of having dragons as allies seemed too good to be true, but he could see the hope beginning to spread around the table. There's something else, Helen continued. The Drakomari don't give their aid lightly. They would need to see proof that humanity truly deserves their intervention. They would want to judge our character and our resolve before committing to help. Admiral Kane stood up slowly, his hands pressed flat against the table. Commander Wade, how quickly could we contact these Drakomari and request their assistance? Helen checked a device on her wrist that Jake had never seen before. I can establish communication within 6 hours, Admiral. But if we're going to ask for their help, we need to be prepared for their test. Captain Jake Morrison stood in the cargo bay of the UES Mercury, watching the final preparations for what might be humanity's last hope. The Mercury was the fastest courier ship in the fleet, built for speed rather than combat, and Jake hoped that would be enough to get them to Paraxis before the Zephrian Empire decided to attack Earth itself. Dr. Ryan Phillips checked his equipment for the third time, his hands still shaking with nervous energy. Commander Helen Wade moved through her own preparations with the calm confidence of someone who had made this journey before. Communications specialist Tom Bradley loaded the last of his translation devices into a portable case, though Wade had warned them that the Drakomari communicated in ways that human technology could barely understand. Remember, the dragons judge by actions and intentions, not by words, Wade said as she sealed her environmental suit. They can sense fear, but they respect courage. They can detect lies, but they value honesty above all else. Most importantly, they've lived for thousands of years, so they have no patience for human politics or military posturing. Jake nodded, though his stomach felt like it was full of ice water. Everything depended on this mission, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was completely unprepared for whatever they would face on the Dragon. Homeworld. The journey to Paraxis took 18 hours, during which Jake tried to prepare himself for meeting beings that had existed since before human civilization began. Wade told them stories of her previous visits, describing dragons the size of battleships who moved through space like dancers and spoke with voices that could be felt in the bones. When they finally arrived in the Paraxis system, Jake understood why the dragons had chosen this place as their home. 3 suns burned in perfect alignment, bathing everything in golden light that seemed to make the very vacuum of space shimmer. Massive asteroids drifted between the stars, their surfaces covered in crystal formations that reflected and refracted the sunlight into impossible patterns. There, Wade said, pointing toward what Jake had first thought was just another asteroid. That's the main city of the Drakomari. Jake looked more carefully and realized that the asteroid was covered in structures that seemed to grow from the rock itself. Towers and bridges connected different sections, all of them gleaming with the same crystal formations he had seen elsewhere in the system. But what took his breath away were the creatures moving between the structures. Dragons soared through space around their city like birds flying through air. Some were small enough that Jake could have fit them in the Mercury's cargo bay, while others stretched for kilometers from nose to tail. Their scales caught the light of the 3 suns and threw it back in every color. Jake could imagine, and several he was sure he couldn't. How do we contact them? Tom Bradley asked, his voice filled with wonder and fear. Wade smiled and activated a device on her belt. We don't contact them. They already know we're here. As if summoned by her words, a shape detached itself from the crystal city and began moving toward the Mercury. Jake watched through the viewports as the creature approached, growing larger with every passing second until it filled their entire field of view. The dragon was golden in color, its scales seeming to contain tiny flames that danced and flickered with each movement. That's Elder Korath, Wade said quietly. He's over 10,000 years old and one of the most respected leaders of the Drakmari. He's also the one who will decide whether humanity deserves dragon aid. The massive creature positioned itself alongside the Mercury, and Jake could see one enormous eye looking directly at him through the viewport. There was intelligence in that eye, ancient and patient and utterly alien, but somehow not hostile. A voice spoke inside Jake's head, bypassing his ears entirely and resonating through his thoughts like the sound of distant thunder. Commander, Wade brings new humans to Paraxis. You carry the scent of fear and desperation. Wade activated her translation device, though Jake suspected it wasn't really necessary. Elder Korath, I present Captain Jake Morrison of the Terran Defense Fleet. He comes seeking aid for humanity in our darkest hour. The dragon's mental voice grew more intense. The screamers from the crystal ships have burned your young worlds. We have seen this happen before to species both worthy and unworthy. Tell us, small human captain, why should the Drakmari risk ourselves for your people? Jake took a deep breath, knowing that everything he said would be judged by a being older than human civilization. Elder Korath, my people are dying. The Zephrian Empire attacked civilian colonies, killing innocent families who had no weapons to defend themselves. They planned to enslave or destroy all of humanity. We don't ask you to fight for us because we deserve it, but because what the Zephrians are doing is wrong. The dragon was silent for a long moment, and Jake could feel something probing at the edges of his mind. It wasn't painful, but it was definitely alien, like cold fingers touching thoughts he hadn't known he was thinking. You speak of right and wrong, but all young species believe their cause is just, Korath said finally. Words are easy things, Captain Morrison. Actions reveal truth. If you would ask for dragon aid, you must submit to the trial of flames. Wade placed a hand on Jake's shoulder. Captain, the trial of flames is a mental link with Elder Korath. He will experience your memories and judge whether humans possess the courage and moral strength worthy of dragon aid. But I have to warn you, the process can be dangerous. Some humans have been damaged by contact with a dragon mind. Jake looked out at the massive golden dragon floating beside their ship and thought about the burned colonies. The 50,000 dead colonists and the Zephrian fleet that was probably already moving toward Earth? What do I need to do? You must leave your ship and allow me to touch you, Korath's voice echoed in his mind. The vacuum will not harm you while you are under my protection, but your fear might. Face me with courage, young captain, and I will see if your species is worthy of salvation. Jake began putting on his environmental suit, his hands steady despite the fear that threatened to overwhelm him. Dr. Phillips and Tom Bradley watched him with expressions of awe and terror, while Wade checked his suit systems with professional efficiency. Remember, she said as she sealed his helmet, show him who you really are. Don't try to hide your fears or your doubts. Dragons can see through deception, but they respect honesty. Jake moved to the Mercury's airlock, taking deep breaths of recycled air while he waited for the outer door to cycle open. When it finally did, he stepped out into space and found himself floating in the golden light of the three suns, face to face with a creature from humanity's oldest legends. Korath extended one massive claw, and Jake reached out to touch it with his gloved hand. The moment their contact was made, the universe exploded into fire and memory, and Jake felt his consciousness merge with something vast and ancient and utterly alien the dragon began to see through. Human eyes. Elder Korath's ancient mind moved through Jake Morrison's memories like a gentle storm, touching each moment with careful attention. Jake felt the dragon experience his childhood on Europa, running through fields of engineered corn under an artificial sky. The dragon sensed his wonder at seeing real Earth birds for the first time, felt his determination to join the fleet after witnessing a pirate attack on a merchant vessel, and shared his grief over losing his parents in a transport accident. But Korath dug deeper, seeking the core of what made Jake human. The dragon experienced Jake's first command, his struggles with impossible decisions, and his sleepless nights worrying about the crews under his protection. Most importantly, Korath felt Jake's genuine horror at the images from the burned colonies. his rage at the senseless killing of innocent people and his desperate love for his species. Your heart burns with righteous fire, Korath's voice echoed through Jake's consciousness. But one human cannot speak for all humanity. Show me your species as you know them to be. Jake opened his memories wider, letting the dragon see humanity. Through his eyes, Korath witnessed the first human colonies, built with careful attention to preserving native life. He saw human scientists working alongside alien researchers, sharing knowledge instead of hoarding it. He experienced human art, music, and literature that spoke of hope and dreams and the endless desire to explore and understand, but Jake didn't hide humanity's darkness either. The dragon saw wars fought over resources and ideology, witnessed cruelty and hatred and the terrible things humans could do to each other. Korath experienced the full complexity of human nature, both its nobility and its capacity for evil. When the mental link finally ended, Jake found himself floating in space, still touching the dragon's massive claw. His environmental suit systems showed that only minutes had passed, though it felt like he had lived through years of memories. "You are an interesting species," Korath said, his mental voice carrying a note of approval. "You have darkness within you, but you struggle against it. You make mistakes, but you learn from them. Most importantly, you value the lives of other species as much as your own." Jake felt relief flood through him, but the dragon wasn't finished. "However, one captain's virtue does not guarantee his species' worth. I have seen noble individuals from corrupt civilizations. Before the Drakmari commit to war, I must witness humanity's actions, not just their intentions." Jake's heart sank. "What do you need to see?" "Commander Wade has told us of human colonies that preserve native ecosystems, of your peaceful contact with other species, of your efforts to build rather than merely conquer. But words and images can be deceiving. I will send observers to see how humans truly behave when they think no one is watching." The dragon released Jake's hand and began to move away from the Mercury. "Return to your homeworld, Captain Morrison. In 3 days, you will have our answer." Jake watched the golden dragon disappear back into the Crystal City, then returned to his ship with his mind still reeling from the experience. Commander Wade, Dr. Phillips, and Tom Bradley gathered around him as soon as he was back aboard, their faces filled with anxious hope. "Well?" Wade asked. "He's going to send observers to Earth and the colonies," Jake replied, settling into a chair as exhaustion hit him. "We have 3 days." The journey back to Earth felt much longer than the trip to Paraxis. Jake spent the time wondering what the dragon observers would see when they looked at humanity. Would they notice the environmental protection laws that governed every colony? Would they see the hospitals that treated alien patients alongside humans? Would they witness the schools where human children learned about other species with curiosity instead of fear? When they arrived at Earth, Jake was surprised to find the defense fleet still in position around the planet. Admiral Kane met them aboard the Mercury as soon as they docked with Liberty Prime Station. "Captain, what happened?" the Admiral asked immediately. "Our sensors detected some unusual energy readings from the Kepler sector, but we couldn't determine what they meant." Jake explained the trial of flames and the dragon observers, while Admiral Kane listened with growing concern. When Jake finished, the older man was quiet for several long minutes. "So our fate depends on beings we can't see, observing us in ways we can't detect," Admiral Kane said finally. "Is there anything we can do to influence their decision?" Commander Wade shook her head. "The dragons can detect deception from light years away. Our only option is to be ourselves and hope that's enough." Meanwhile, far from Earth, General Vexillar of the Zephrian Empire stood aboard his flagship, studying reports from his scouts. The crystalline warrior's 4 arms moved in agitation as he reviewed the pathetic state of human defenses. 40 ships, he said to his aide, his voice like breaking glass. "The entire human fleet consists of 40 obsolete vessels and a handful of defense stations. They are even weaker than our intelligence suggested. General, should we begin the final assault?" His aide asked. Vexillar's compound eyes glittered with satisfaction. "Yes, but not immediately. Let them wait in fear for a few more days. Terror weakens resolve. and I want the humans to be completely demoralized before we destroy their homeworld. The Zephrian fleet began moving toward Sol System, 200 massive ships that bristled with weapons designed to reduce planets to ash. Their crews looked forward to easy victory over the primitive humans who had dared to expand into space that rightfully belonged to the Empire, but the Zephrians were not the only ones moving through space. Invisible to their sensors, incorporeal, beings of living energy drifted between human settlements and starships, observing everything with ancient eyes. These were the dragon observers that Korath had sent, spirits of long-dead Drakmari who could travel anywhere in the galaxy without being detected. They watched human rescue teams working tirelessly to help survivors from the attacked colonies. They observed human scientists sharing their research freely with alien colleagues. They witnessed human families adopting orphan children from other species, and human teachers patiently explaining complex concepts to alien students, but they also saw darker things. They observed human politicians arguing about colony defense budgets while people died. They witnessed discrimination against alien refugees and saw humans who viewed other species as inferior. The observers recorded everything without judgment, knowing that Elder Korath would weigh all they had seen. On the third day, Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of Liberty Prime, looking out at Earth and wondering if he would ever see his homeworld again. The dragon observers had been invisible and silent, giving no hint of what they had found or what judgment they would render. That was when the space around Earth began to shimmer with golden light. Jake felt his breath catch. As massive forms began to materialize out of hyperspace, their scales reflecting the light of Sol like living jewels. 50 dragons emerged from faster-than-light travel, each one larger than the biggest human battleship, each one moving with grace that seemed to defy physics. Elder Korath's mental voice reached every human in the Sol System simultaneously, carrying the weight of ancient authority and terrible power. Humans of Earth, the Drakmari have observed your species and found you worthy of aid. The crystal ship invaders approach your world with genocide in their hearts. This shall not be permitted. Jake Morrison smiled as he watched the dragons take position around Earth, their forms blazing with contained fire. Behind them, still 2 days away, the Zephrian fleet continued its approach, unaware that they were about to face opponents unlike anything they had ever encountered. The dragons had come to war. General Vexillar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the Sol System grow larger on his tactical display. The Zephrian fleet moved in perfect formation, 200 ships of crystal and metal that had never known defeat. His compound eyes glowed with satisfaction as he studied the pathetic human defenses gathered around their homeworld. General, our sensors are detecting unusual energy signatures near Earth, his tactical officer reported, his crystalline voice tinged with confusion. The readings don't match any known human technology. Vexillar dismissed the report with a wave of one of his 4 arms. Humans are primitive beings who resort to desperation when faced with superior force. Whatever crude weapons they have constructed will not save them. But as the Zephrian fleet entered the outer edge of the Sol System, Vexillar began to see things that made his confidence waver. The energy signatures his sensors had detected were not weapons or ships, but living creatures of impossible size floating in space around Earth. His tactical computer struggled to classify what it was seeing, finally settling on the inadequate description of large biological entities. What are those things? Vexillar demanded, staring at the massive forms that seemed to dance between Earth and its moon. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the U's Valiant, watching the same scene with very different emotions. The 50 dragons positioned themselves in a 3-dimensional formation that seemed random but felt perfectly coordinated. Elder Korath hung in space directly between the approaching Zephrian fleet and Earth, his golden scales blazing with contained fire. All human vessels maintain defensive positions around Earth. Admiral Kane's voice crackled over the communications system. Do not engage the enemy unless directly attacked. Our allies will handle this battle. Jake felt a mixture of awe and terror as he watched the dragons prepare for war. Each creature was unique in size and coloring, from small swift dragons, no larger than fighter craft, to massive ancient beings that dwarfed even the biggest Zephrian battleship. They moved through space with fluid grace, their wings somehow providing propulsion in the vacuum, while their eyes burned with intelligence older than human civilization. The Zephrian fleet slowed as it approached the strange formation, their commanders uncertain how to react to opponents they had never encountered before. Vexillar opened communications to the human fleet, his image appearing on screens throughout the Sol system. "Humans of Earth," the crystalline general said, his voice carrying the arrogance of certain victory. "You have allied yourselves with unknown creatures in a futile attempt to avoid your destiny. Surrender now, and your deaths will be swift. Continue this resistance, and we will make your world burn for 1,000 years. Elder Korath's response echoed through the minds of every being in the Sol system, human and Zephrian alike. His mental voice carried the weight of 10,000 years and the fury of ancient justice. Crystal warriors who feast on genocide, you have attacked the innocent and called it strength. You have burned homes and murdered children and called it conquest. Today you learn why the galaxy fears dragons." Vexillar tried to respond, but found that his voice would not work. The dragon's telepathic presence pressed against his mind like a crushing weight, and for the first time in his military career, the Zephrian general felt genuine fear. "Attack formations," Vexillar managed to order his fleet. "Destroy those creatures and then burn the human world." The first wave of Zephrian ships opened fire with plasma cannons that could melt through the strongest armor. Beams of superheated energy lanced toward the dragons, strikes that should have reduced any living creature to vapor. Instead, the dragons simply absorbed the energy into their scales, their bodies glowing brighter as they converted the attack into fuel for their own power. Elder Korath responded by drawing energy from the solar wind and the fusion processes within his own body. The ancient dragon's scales blazed like a small star as he gathered power, then released it in a directed plasma stream that cut through 3 Zephrian ships as, if they were made of paper, the battle that followed was unlike anything in the history of galactic warfare. The dragons moved through space in perfect coordination, their telepathic links allowing them to function as a single organism with 50 bodies. They wove between enemy ships like dancers, their plasma breath carving through hulls while their natural armor deflected return fire. Jake Morrison watched in fascination as a small blue dragon no larger than a shuttlecraft danced around a massive Zephrian cruiser, staying ahead of its weapons while systematically destroying its engine sections with precisely aimed plasma bursts. Meanwhile, a huge red dragon the size of a city used its claws to literally tear apart an enemy battleship, its scales shrugging off point-blank cannon fire. "My God," whispered Communications Officer Tom Bradley, standing beside Jake on the Valiant's bridge. "They're not just fighting, they're playing with them." It was true. The dragons moved with such overwhelming superiority that the battle felt less like a war and more like a demonstration. Every Zephrian attack was anticipated and countered. Every tactical formation was broken with casual ease. Every desperate maneuver was met with responses that seemed almost bored. General Vexillar tried to rally his fleet, but his commanders were beginning to panic. Ships that had never retreated from any battle were pulling back from opponents they could not understand or effectively fight. The crystalline warriors who had conquered dozens of worlds found themselves completely outmatched by creatures that treated their most powerful weapons like minor annoyances. Elder Korath ended the battle with a display of power that would be remembered throughout the galaxy for centuries to come. The ancient dragon spread his massive wings and began to glow like a small sun, drawing energy from the solar radiation around him. Then, with careful precision, he released a controlled solar flare that disabled half the remaining Zephrian fleet without destroying them. The enemy ships drifted helplessly in space, their systems overloaded but their crews alive. Korath's mental voice reached every survivor simultaneously, carrying a message that would haunt their dreams for the rest of their lives. "You came to commit genocide against the innocent. This is the punishment for such evil. Return to your empire and tell them what happens to those who prey upon the weak. The surviving Zephrian ships fled the Sol system in complete disorder, their formation broken and their confidence shattered. General Vexillar's flagship was among the survivors, but the crystalline warrior would never again speak of easy conquest or human inferiority. In the aftermath of the battle, Elder Korath and the other dragons gathered in space near Earth. The ancient being's mental voice reached Jake Morrison directly, carrying warmth and approval. Your species has proven worthy of dragon friendship, Captain Morrison. We will establish a presence in your space, serving as both protectors and teachers. In return, we ask only that humans continue to grow in wisdom and compassion. Jake felt tears running down his cheeks as he watched the dragons begin to settle into permanent positions throughout human space. Some took up residence near colony worlds, while others established themselves along major trade routes. Elder Korath chose to remain near Earth, his massive form becoming a new constellation that children would point to with wonder and pride. Admiral Kane's voice came over the communication system, addressing the entire human fleet. Ladies and gentlemen, today marks the beginning of a new era for humanity. We are no longer alone in the galaxy, and we have allies who will stand with us against any threat. Jake Morrison looked out at the stars where dragon forms moved like living jewels against the darkness. Humanity had faced extinction and emerged stronger, protected by ancient guardians who had judged them worthy of salvation. The future stretched ahead, full of possibilities that no one could have imagined just days before. The dragons had come to stay.